Hello and welcome back to the Galway Film Flaw and to today's screening of Pure Grit. I hope you enjoyed the documentary as much as I did. Thought it was a terrific film about human determination, the resilience of the human spirit, and in particular the resilience of our hero, an incredible young Native American woman, Sharmaine. And I'm also delighted now to be joined by the director of Pure Grit, Kim Bartley, to tell us more about the film. Hi, Kim.
Hi, Will. Hi. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
How you doing? I suppose to start off, maybe catch us up on Charmaine, on what she's been up to since you've finished filming and where she's at now.
Uh, she's doing great. She's back racing. The season started in June, so she's actually, I think she's racing this weekend. Um, Look, there's been ups and downs since we last met, and obviously, and she actually got COVID, but she was okay. And she's doing well. Like, obviously, you've watched it now, so you know the two girls aren't together anymore. They've both had a couple of other relationships since that haven't kind of worked out. So she's free, single, and racing horses.
Sounds like she'll be happy out.
Yeah.
Since you touched on it, actually, we read in the news over here how COVID was sort of decimating to the reservations over there. Did you get much news from that period on the res? What was life like during COVID?
Funnily enough, in the end, it seems that actually a lot of the tribal nations managed to handle it quite well in the States. Um, I know on Wind River, it was just creeping in. We left our final trip. We ended up getting the last flight out of the States before they shut down. So it was very, very close. And at that point, there was no awareness. Like, we were very aware of it, and no one on the reservation seemed to be really that aware of it at all. And after that, it wasn't too bad. I know the Navajo Nation in the south was very badly hit. Wind River was okay, and generally speaking, I think everyone's been amazed at how well it's been handled on reservations. So
Great, that's good to know.
yeah,
Good for Charmaine. Um,
yeah.
I was just saying, by way of an intro, what an incredible documentary it is about resilience and determination. Um, and it really is, and all the more so because it just seems like, obviously, as a young Native American woman, the odds were really stacked against Charmaine. I feel like there was so much trauma, inherited trauma as a Native American woman, personal trauma. She talks about being a survivor of child sex abuse. Um, I guess you were there with her personally for a period of over 3 years, wasn't it? I believe. Tell us about that amazing spirit of just standing tall despite all of these things.
Look, she's incredible. Like, she still inspires me. And in fact, not even just Charmaine. I'm sure it came across watching it, the group of women around her mom and her sister and her sister-in-law. And I mean, they've had so much, like, just in that short window that I spent with them, back and forth over, yeah, just under 3 years, 2.5 years. So many things happen, and it feels like every time. And I love that line where her mom says, I taught my children that when you fall off the horse, you just get back on. And that's it. That's exactly how that family live, and Charmaine in particular. And I mean, the winters are so harsh. There's no work, there's nothing available on the reservation. I mean, generally speaking, the experience is often that any young people who have the opportunity to leave, which is really sad. And it's very hard, I think, then to fit in elsewhere. Life is so different in an urban context to that reservation, for example. And then, there's issues with racism very often and all that kind of stuff. So it's a very, very harsh environment. Very obviously, there are a lot of social issues too. And it's kind of chicken and egg, as you said, intergenerational trauma, historical trauma, lack of jobs, harsh winters. Therefore, drugs and alcohol help pass the time, and it's really very tough. And her family, I suppose, before I even met them, they'd had all these awful accidents. Charmaine's brother had ended up in a wheelchair, broke every bone in his body. Charity obviously had been in the accident. Charmaine had been in a few accidents herself, and yet they keep going. And I mean, it shows how much they love the racing, because no matter what, they will get back up on that horse and race,
Yeah, I
which
thought that was amazing. In Charity's case in particular, I couldn't believe towards the end of the documentary that she was doing this. I was sort of like,
no,
I don't know whether to
I,
admire you or just say, this is crazy.
I know that no, they were incredible, and I really hope that their stories, and Charmaine's story in particular, I suppose her hope in making the documentary was that she'd actually encourage other young women in her situation. And you mentioned that, I mean, the statistics are that 1 in 3 Native American women have experienced sexual violence. It's really a massive problem. And because of tight knit small communities, a broken justice system, which has its roots in history as well, very few people see justice, and therefore a lot of women don't necessarily come forward. So I think her dream is that this will get out there and be shown in schools and on reservations and other communities around the US in particular, but everywhere, and kind of give hope to young women that just because something has happened to you doesn't mean that you can't just, keep going. So she's amazing. She's so inspiring, I think.
And she talks a lot in the film about wanting to be a positive impact and to make a positive impact. I really admire the way she makes all these little positive affirmations when she's talking with people. You know, she's like, "I love and appreciate you for making me coffee," or like, "Thank you, brother, for helping me find my horse," um, which I found so admirable. But also, it seems like I guess it tracks for a person who's I suppose on this journey of healing. I guess it's a continual process with her.
Yeah, and she definitely is on a journey. Like, it's funny, when I met Charmaine, I had no idea of her past. I met her because I was interested in the horse racing. And very quickly, I mean, we formed a bond very quickly, and very quickly she started telling me about all of that. And then the film kind of became about that as much as about the racing. And, you know, I think it was a healing process. Like, I think the film probably helped her heal. It also helped her, there was all these issues around her family. They didn't want her to speak out when she did. She had since addressed it with them, but it was very tense still. And I think now they all speak about it openly. They've all seen the film, and I think that's helped there. She had her ups and downs, even through filming. Obviously, it's very difficult to do an observation documentary when you live so far away. I mean, it would take it took 2 days every time to get to the reservation from here in Wicklow. Uh, Very expensive as well, and we had a small budget. So in all, I think we managed 6 trips, I think it was, which is a very very tight amount of time, and every trip was a week, maybe 2 weeks at the very most. So within that time, she had her ups and downs. She had times where she probably drinking more than she should have, like when she ended up in the DUI and in court and all of that. And so it's difficult, but she's really now in the last year, she's doing great. She has a job. I think she's happy to be back on the reservation because she's so attached to her culture, and she really, really feels it's important to keep that going and to live that life. So she's healing, and I think that's a lifelong process, but I think she's really doing well now.
Yeah,
I hope
that's great.
she,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I mean, not to dwell on the negative aspects because I think it's fantastic that she's in a positive place right now. But I thought it was just really apt how you juxtapose the scene with Cash, I believe it was, talking about the sacrifices they made to keep off to ward off the spirits who like feed off negative energy. I mean, it takes on a whole new poignancy when we find out what happens to Cash. But at the time, it came just on the heels of when Charmaine was going through this. It really looked like a self-destructive period after losing the race, and I suppose she talks a lot about pain in the film, but that must have been a time during which you could really see her going through a lot of pain.
Yeah, and I mean, those are choices you make too when you're filming this kind of documentary, is that you can show everything, or you can show some moments that just give a sense of it. And I felt, I knew she wasn't in a good place. I didn't think it was the right thing to film her when she was stoned or whatever. I just wouldn't do that. That's not what the film was about. But yet it's about her life, and I had to show those moments. So like, even the court, it was difficult to, she was wary about that. She was worried that it would look negative in terms of how people viewed her. But she then, we spoke about it so often. She understood that in terms of trying to help people, you kind of have to show, well, look, I've hit these lows as well. But she did have some lows, and obviously then when Cash died, I think that moment, I mean, I suppose Cash struggled. He struggled with mental health. Um, and he'd been really, really good for the first 2 years that we were there. And then the second last trip, we just had a sense, and that's when I filmed that scene, the ice fishing. There was just a sense that he wasn't in a good place. And I remember finding that conversation really poignant about the spirits, because it was a metaphor for everything that was going on. We flew home, and literally I think the day we landed or the following day, I got a call saying that Cash had taken his life. So it was a total shock, and that had been the last trip. But the family then asked me to go back. They really wanted what had happened included in the film, because for whatever the reasons were, so I promised them I would. So we went back for, I think it was 3 days, just to film that scene, and then came back again. But it was, it was difficult.
Yeah, that must be very hard. And can I ask, like in terms of in you as the director, choosing in that way which elements to portray, I imagine it's also particularly tricky in that, I was particularly interested in the film because, the FLA was started as a post-colonial festival. We love Indigenous stories, and there's a big sort of corrective push happening in the industry right now in terms of giving agency to Indigenous people to tell their own stories. But that, of course, doesn't preclude a good filmmaker from anywhere from telling any story. So I'm just curious about how you approach that, when it came to Sharmaine as someone who's not from that place, and you're, not claiming to have lived her experience, but in saying to her, I want to tell your story. And then further in the process of that, deciding which elements to include and which elements to leave out.
Well, it was funny enough. I think it was Charmaine asked me to tell her story. I went to meet her. We met on Facebook. I'd been at a Native American race and thought it was incredible, and I was trying to find out about the women, because I'd only ever seen one woman at that time. So I kind of got onto this network of women who raced on Facebook, and up popped Charmaine, and she just looks so striking straight away. We were communicating on Facebook, and then I ended up in the States on another shoot and managed to find the time to get up to meet her. And it was very much an exploratory trip. I had no plans at all. I just wanted to meet her. I had my camera because I was on another shoot. And literally, like I said, we just kind of clicked. And I still feel that it was like she'd been waiting for this moment. It was really pure chance. But on the second day, she just kind of said, "Look, I want to do a documentary, and let's do it." And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Here we go. And that was it. The whole issue of representation, it's a tricky one, because I think it's so important that marginalized voices tell their stories. And look, we all know it's a white middle class dominated, film isn't dominated by white middle class men, and women more so now. The dream for me is that you give the tools to the people who want to tell their story. I mean, I know, for example, in Charmaine's case, she wouldn't have had a way to tell her story. She wouldn't have had a way to make this documentary. And hopefully in years to come, if she wants to tell her documentary, she'll find a Native American filmmaker who can. But I also think, I don't believe that, I do think there's a slight movement that's gone too far, where it's kind of, sex and color and gender and race must define who's making the film, and I don't think that's right either. I think fundamentally, for me, it's all down to trust. If you have someone's trust, and it's a collaborative thing, therefore it doesn't really matter in some ways who tells it, if it's being told the right way and respectfully. But obviously, it's hugely important that people, because look, the reality is, if you're living on a res in the middle of Wyoming, you've no access to anything, and you've no access to film school, you've no access to anything like that, and that has to change. It has to change. Same here, even there's a little change now happening within the traveling community in Ireland, but it's been a long time coming, and it's nowhere near where it needs to be in terms of travelers telling their own stories, for example. So it's something that's progressing.
And just on that as well, actually, I mean, I'm curious, as an Irish woman who was on the res making the story, I mean, by no means the experiences are the same, but you can obviously see parallels. I suppose the markers of colonization in life on the res and Irish society, if not now, then once upon a time. Was that sort of something that jumped out to you as an Irish woman?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first time I ever set foot on a reservation, that's the first thing that struck me. The parallels were so strong. I mean, historically, boarding schools, industrial schools, issues around race, issues around, you know, violence. I mean, there's so many good and bad parallels. Um, uh, yeah, I mean, it was really striking. It's something like I really hoped Sharmaine would be able to come over here for this, and unfortunately with the way things are, she wasn't, but she will come as soon as we get an opportunity. We'll bring her over. And I've talked to her about traveler communities, and she's like, I want to go out there and show them how we race. And I'd say if she saw someone on a bareback riding through Dublin, it would blow her mind because I've explained to her that this happens in an urban context, and she's never seen that. But yeah, no, the parallels are huge. And they're histories of, like you say, colonial histories and histories of communities that are on the margins and abandoned and forgotten and rejected, and yet have their own ways, their own customs, and their own traditions, and trying to keep them alive. And I think there's a movement here as well amongst young travelers involved in the arts, trying to keep traveler culture alive. And it's very much what Sharmaine is keen on doing with her own Native American culture.
That's great. Yeah. I want to go back to you talked about making the 6 trips over, and obviously with an observational doc like this, structure is a tricky thing. Did you go into it with a preconceived idea? I mean, I suppose the racing is an obvious touchstone, and we see her go through the various races. But I suppose in a documentary like this, life takes you down different paths. Maybe you could tell us about it.
It does. And I mean, it's the beauty of observational documentary. It's what I love about it. You just know, you've no idea what's coming around the corner. I mean, it's the hardest kind of documentary to get funded, because people want to know what the beginning, middle, and end is. And you don't know. I mean, you don't know till you're in the edit really what the end is. And I suppose, I'm not sure I'd undertake it with such a huge distance again, because it's so frustrating if someone rings up and says this really exciting thing is happening tomorrow. That's it. There's no way. Whereas if I'm in Ireland, I just go straight out the camera and capture whatever it is. But no, and it was tricky. It was tricky because and this is in no way disrespectful. In fact, they themselves call it Indian time. Things happen on Indian time, and that means that nothing ever goes as planned. So if I fly all the way over and had a week, and there was meant to be a race on the Monday, and I get in on the Sunday, and come Thursday the race hasn't happened, and you're like, and then it may happen or it may not happen, and just whatever, you just have to go with the flow. But it's tricky, but I think that's the beauty of it. I love it. That's what's so exciting, and that's what's it's just exciting, because you've no control really. You just have to go with it.
Yeah, I think it's a parallel with Galway time there, but I won't go down that path. But sticking with that idea, where do you decide as well, I suppose, where do you draw the line? Because there mightn't be a specific structure that you go into it with in mind, but it has to end somewhere. And do you get a feeling about these things, or how does it work for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose you get to know someone, so you have a sense of what really is going on in their lives and what is important to them, and what milestones are ahead. So I suppose I would have had a sense in the winter that the next season racing, when she was ready to go and that was it, and she'd kind of fallen off the wagon a bit and had all this difficulty, and the relationship had broken up, getting back up on the horse and racing was going to be the end. And I mean, it kind of had to be anyway, budget wise and everything else, time wise. Then obviously, for instance, what happened with Cash was unexpected. So that throws another curveball, and I don't mean that in an awful cold way. I just mean in terms of the story structure. And then you have other things like that final race there was some kind of rivalry going on between there are two Native American organizations that run the races, and there was some kind of rivalry that year between the two. We'd filmed at one, so when we showed up at this big race that she was in, they wouldn't let us film. And then you're winging it over a wall with a long lens and trying to, so which killed me. I always feel that last scene could have been a lot stronger had I been on the track, like right there. But c'est la vie, you just have to do what you can.
Well, I still think it was thrilling. I did wanted to ask you about that. I mean, the photography of the horse racing, but I still think you did an amazing job. It was thrilling as well to see Charmaine's POV in some of those shots as well. I guess you had a GoPro on her.
GoPro on her head, yeah.
No, it was great.
Those races are over in the blink of an eye, and I thankfully was able to find a camera guy from Montana who did a lot of filming with horses, who joined us for 2 days at each of the races, because you couldn't possibly shoot it on one camera. In fact, look, in a dream world, you'd have shot it on 3 or 4 cameras, because the races are over in under a minute. So there's no second take, it's just boom.
Yeah.
It's not a job for one person.
It was thrilling. But it looks as well, like looking at the credits, there's an impressive list of credits with some amazing collaborators from over there, it seems. I mean, obviously you had the participation of the Wind River tribe, but you also had people like Taylor Sheridan as an EP. What was the buy-in from the community over there like?
Oh, the buy-in was great, because I went in very naively, not realizing how important the actual, let's say, that the tribal authorities were to this. So the first couple of days I was shooting with Sharmaine in the corral at the back of the house. And then as I got to know it after a couple of days, I realized that actually I need to check that it's okay to film within the grounds of the reservation. So we had all these meetings where we addressed the tribal committee and explained what we were doing, and Sharmaine spoke to them, and they were up for it. It was great. They've seen it, they've endorsed it, they loved it, in fact, which was really, because you know that you've made a film that was truthful, but still you're always, I can't sleep the night before showing to people, specifically Charmaine and Savannah, but then after that the tribe. But no, it's been great, and everyone was supportive. And Taylor Sheridan, I had approached on the back of the Wind River movie. He then was able to bring on board his 2 exec producers. One was Navajo, Daryl Begay, so he was able to navigate that world too, in terms of permissions and all that kind of stuff. So it was great, yeah. And we were very, very lucky.
Fantastic. Well, listen, it all shows on the screen. Again, it was a terrific documentary. Highly enjoyed it. I hope the audience watching at home did too. I can't wait to talk to you about it all again in person this week at Fatherburg Park. Thanks a million for chatting to me today, Kim.
Thank you, Will. Thanks, everyone.